World events are coming at an incredibly fast pace, and here to help us understand those world events is newsman Bill Koenig. Bill Koenig, pleasure to have you once again. Always love to talk to you because you've got a range of experience my own experiential range pales by comparison. Bill is the director of Koenig World Watch Daily. He's a White House correspondent. By the way, a credentialed White House correspondent, which puts him elbow to elbow with a lot of people who have a lot of influence, and most of them are really not believers.
Best I can tell, out of the 250 that have hard pass or credentialed correspondents, I would say there are 6 or 7 believers, and I'm the only one that's evangelical. The others are Protestants from the replacement theology churches.
What a great opportunity for you.
It is. Wonderful people.
Yeah.
And it's been a pleasure and a real pleasure to be there, Gary.
Well, Bill, there's a lot I want to talk about today. We've only got something less than 30 minutes, and we've got so much to talk about. Let's talk about Paris. In recent events, we want to cover the events in the Middle East. We'll be talking about ISIS today. We're going to be talking about the Russian influence there, world leaders pondering great questions in the Middle East. But let's go back to Paris and some of the recent events that came out of Paris. And I want you to give us your perspective on what in the world is going on there.
Well, Gary, when there's a major terror event, I look at what that country typically has been doing to Israel at the time of a catastrophe. 9/11, 17 days before 9/11, as I write about in Eye to Eye, and in also my DVD, President Bush was negotiating with Crown Prince Abdullah of Saudi Arabia on a future Palestinian state and the division of Jerusalem, that East Jerusalem would be the capital of this Palestinian state. The work was completed on 9/10, and then the horrific event of 9/11. And as I shared with you before, the God of Israel did not produce the evil of 9/11, but he didn't stop it. As his country was about, his country that he gave to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was about to be, a large portion of it, the Judea, Samaria, and East Jerusalem, were about to be given up for a Palestinian state.
Right.
And this catastrophe. Well, the French last year, December 2014, the French Parliament, early part of December, voted in favor of a Palestinian state. They influenced the EU Parliament to vote on a future Palestinian state. And on December 17, the EU Parliament voted 498 to 88 in favor of a Palestinian state in principle.
Okay.
About 150 people abstained, they didn't vote. But that was a substantial vote. That's also the day the euro collapsed, December 17th. At that day, it was 125 or 1.25 euros to the dollar, and it collapsed down to 110. And now I think it's about 1.05. It collapsed, the euro, at that same day. Then the French said, we're going to take this to the UN Security Council, and we want them to pass a resolution that calls for Israel and the Palestinians to get back to the peace table and get this worked out. That was a December 30 vote. It didn't pass because the United States vetoed it, and the British abstained. So it didn't pass, but the French were determined to get that UN resolution passed to get the Israelis and Palestinians back. And then the major terror event of January 7 in Paris.
Now, Paris. Everybody remembers the dire street scene. It was literally hundreds of bullets being fired and people racing around Parisian streets, and the mobilization of the army and the police, and you're saying this didn't just pop up out of nothing. There were causes. There were events that brought this to pass. And this is the whole thesis, by the way, of Bill's book, Eye to Eye, and his DVD. And I'm going to tell you in a minute how you can get these for yourself. And it's a fascinating thesis that nothing is happening by sheer coincidence or by accident, that there are connections that you can make between, shall we say, the sin of man, the false motivations of man.
And pressuring Israel to divide what God gave to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their descendants. And Gary, the international community, the United States has been the point man in the peace process. So most of these major catastrophes have happened. In the United States, there's been 90 events, most of them billion-dollar record-setting events that have transpired since the perfect storm of October 1991, when the Madrid Land for Peace Conference happened, when 30-foot waves were crashing into President Bush's home in Maine, Kennebunkport, Maine.
Wow.
And so I've seen when the Europeans, whether it's the French or the Germans or the Brits, have pressured Israel, whether it's Tony Blair or Angela Merkel or Sarkozy when he was president, or Hollande as when he's president of France, when they are pressuring Israel to do peace and to give up the biblical heartland of Israel for a future Arab state, these events happen. So I looked at that pattern. I was watching the French very closely because they were basically telling the United States, we're taking over, kind of move aside unless you're going to join us, but we're going forward and going for it.
Well, you know, in the Bible, God refers to Israel as the apple of his eye.
Absolutely.
Now, if somebody touches you in the eye,
The most sensitive part of the body.
and that's what you're saying.
Absolutely.
You touch Israel,
It is.
and God reacts. That's what you're saying.
Absolutely. You look at Joel 3:2, talks about those, God will judge those nations that have parted his land and dispersed his people in the final battle. It is going to be a time of judgment. And also Zechariah 12:3, Zechariah 12:9, Jerusalem is going to become a burdensome stone. And
Yes.
every major world leader right now wants to divide Jerusalem for the purpose of having East Jerusalem as the capital of a future Palestinian state. And then Zechariah 12:9 talks about when God will bring the nations of the world and the militaries of the world against Jerusalem and destroy them. But Gary, this continues. The French continued at the UN in September, but October they accelerated the pressure on Israel. We need peace talks. We need to get the sides together. We need monitors, military people on the Temple Mount to take that responsibility away from Israel. The whole month of October, they were relentless in their pursuit of dealing with the Temple Mount, of dealing with the peace process. And it even came to the point that we want cameras on top the Temple Mount. So on November 12th, Jordan was in the process of placing cameras on the Temple Mount to watch the activity on that area.
And who would be pressured by these cameras? Who would
It would affect Israel. It would affect their right to that piece of land. There was even a push by the Palestinians to have Israel to have no influence, no sovereignty, no right to security on the Temple Mount, and acting as if the Temple Mount has no relevance.
Well, let's read a passage of Scripture here, Psalm 87. And this is one of my favorite Psalms. His foundation is in the holy mountains. That's verse 1. Well, the holy mountains, we know where that is. Those would be all the mountains in and around Jerusalem. And then verse 2 says, the Lord loveth the gates of Zion more than all the dwellings of Jacob. Well, we know where the gates of Zion are. You know, they surround the holy mountain.
Absolutely.
I mean, so we've got a perfect description of a location here. Glorious things are spoken of thee, O city of God. So this is God's favorite place, it says in the Bible. So you start tampering with that place, and he would react, right?
No doubt about it, Gary. This is the epicenter. This is the center of God's universe. This 34 acres here. This is where our Messiah, Jesus Christ, Yeshua, is going to return to begin his 1,000-year millennial reign. This land is so valuable. I mean, this is where the Jewish temples were. And then the Muslims built the Dome of the Rock and the Alaska Mosque right on top of this very important location of the past Jewish temples. And it's going to come down to this. This is a battle for this property. So on the 12th of November, the cameras they're starting to install the cameras, and the next day, another major terror event in Paris. The parallels of what happened around 9/11, the parallels of terror events in the United States and other parts of the world, specifically the United States and Europe, because they've been the point people
Well,
in the
we
peace process.
recently had a terrorist event in California.
Correct.
In which, without a doubt, a Muslim cell group of some kind. I understand they had some $30,000 worth of weapons, including bombs, improvised explosive devices. They had high-powered rifles and literally hundreds of rounds of ammunition, so forth, so on. They were ready for anything, bulletproof vests, and they launched and killed most of the people at a Christmas party, ironically enough. It would be a strike directly at the heart of the Lord, if you want to take it literally, a Christmas party.
And a Jewish believer was involved.
Jewish believer.
He had an argument with this guy previously, and he was anxious.
Messianic Jewish believer, as reported in Arutz Shava, which is an Israeli news outlet. So, using that as a foundation, what caused that? Did anything else precipitate that? Was anything happening that would have precipitated?
Well, this is another
event?
example of our authorities beginning to not. They just don't have a handle on this. I mean, this is a guy that graduated from a university in California. He'd been at this organization for, I believe, 5 or 6 years. He'd been radicalized the last couple of years. Another example of somebody said, well, he's a nice guy, he's a pleasant guy, he was a good employee, on and on and on. And then all of a sudden he turns into this terrorist, along with his wife, who they dropped their 6-month-old baby off at the grandmother's house and then went over here and did this horrific terror event, Gary. This was about a week after President Obama, in his Thanksgiving message, compared specifically Middle Eastern and North African refugees, a lot of those being Muslims, to experiencing this same plight of the pilgrims that were Christians. But he used them as an example and as a pattern for our country being open to future refugees because of, look all the way back to Thanksgiving, the pilgrims that came here to America. They're completely different people.
And so essentially he's comparing Christians with Muslim immigrants, and saying these two are the same event.
And we should be open. We were open to the pilgrims. We should be open to these people as well. Unfortunately, a lot of the ones that are coming in, Gary, are Muslim. Very few Christians, as we have Christians being persecuted and slaughtered for their faith throughout the Middle East. Very few Christians are coming in through these refugee programs, and a lot of them have just been very careful not to expose their faith because they felt that would be a problem.
Now, I want to ask you a very pointed question, Bill. You are a White House correspondent, and there you are in that briefing room that we've all seen on television, and questions being fired here and there. And we get the sense out here in the hinterlands, we get the sense that there's no real understanding of what you and I are talking about. How do you analyze that?
Well, Gary, it's interesting, as I think the Republicans and the conservatives, who completely voted against the Iran deal, who completely look at the Middle East as a war between good and evil, more people should listen to them. More people should acknowledge that this is a very serious battle. A majority of our media, 90-95%, is liberal. They're very pro-Democrat, and the Democrats look at the Middle East as a lack of socioeconomic opportunity. In the region, they don't look at it for what it is. A lot of the Democrats control the think tanks in Washington that have led the United States and the White House and the State Department for bad Middle East policy for 40 plus years. They don't understand the problem. They don't understand the people. Or they downplay the fact that we have a major war taking place in the Middle East right now between Shia Islam, led by the Iranians, and Sunni Islam, led by the Saudis and the Turks and the members of Qatar.
Now let's talk about that war. Now let's talk about ISIS, sometimes called ISIL by our president and others. Really goes back to World War I and the breakup of the Ottoman Empire. There's been a sore spot there After World War I, the Middle East was broken up by negotiators into several boundary zones. Iraq became a nation at that time. I think the Lebanese boundary was drawn, the Jordanian boundary was drawn.
Yep.
Almost out of the clear blue sky, these people decided to lay this out, and in conjunction, by the way, with the discovery of petroleum in the Middle East, and that became a kind of a, if you will, a gold rush, black gold rush. And the Western nations swooped in there and they started dividing the whole territory up. But it was after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, leaving a bad taste in the mouths of the Arab sheikhs over there. And to this day, they're trying to sort of get their game back. And here comes ISIS and says, we need to reestablish the old caliphate, the old empire. And they seem to be doing it.
Well, and then you have the Shia Muslims that are led by Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini and his leadership. They control Iran. They control Iraq. They control Iraq's military right now, according to a friend of mine from the Middle East, a correspondent there. They control Lebanon through Hezbollah. They have a very significant role in Syria and control over Assad. They've been in there for 30 years with them and their military advisors. And they also are in a position of influence in Yemen. So, this is opposing caliphates. So the Islamic State has a lot of territory, but right now you've got the British, the Germans, the French, the United States, and Russia stating that they have a war with the Islamic State. I mean, you got a lot of jets in the skies right now trying to take out the Islamic State, which will help facilitate a Shia state. Shia caliphate across. So this is a battle between the Shia and the Sunni caliphate.
And where do you think Russia really stands? They just had a plane shot down over
Well, that's
there.
been a big problem because the United States and a few others are concerned that Russia's going into Syria to take out the Islamic State, but unfortunately, a lot of their conflict has been against rebel groups that the United States has helped support that oppose the Assad government because they want to prop up Assad. Russia wants to prop up Assad. And they're not doing that much with the Islamic State problem. They say they're going to, but they haven't. They've been more focused on taking out these rebel groups that oppose Assad. And that's where the tension lies between Russia and Turkey. And there's bad blood between Putin and Erdogan right now, Russia and Turkey. And they also believe that Turkey's buying Islamic State oil, which is helping facilitate a lot of this terror. So it's become very, very convoluted and very challenging to deal with. At the same time, Islamic State are masters at the social network. They have an incredible outreach. These events bring them new people from new militants from the Middle East and Northern Africa, and they're become a very, very significant force. And it looks like there is a ISIS connection with this recent terror attack in San Bernardino, California as well.
So you've got ISIS wanting to reestablish the old caliphate that would really, they wanted to take in, I think, North Africa, including Egypt.
Oh, absolutely. They have a
Sudan.
Yeah,
they would like to take all of that and turn it into a new caliphate.
Absolutely.
And of course, Israel would be done away with completely in that transaction. Now, those of us who read the Bible understand that that's impossible. That can't happen. Israel's going to stand.
Oh, Israel's going to stand, and as we know based on the scriptures, Gary, in Ezekiel and Jeremiah and Zechariah and others, that the God of Israel is going to be there to defend the nation. Difficult time, as we've talked about, Gary, to be prime minister of Israel with all these things that are taking place on their borders.
Oh,
and, Israel also spoke very much against the agreement with Iran that was agreed to on July 14th. That is going to release $150 billion to the lead terror organization. This is a lead state-sponsored terror in the world who funds Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and other organizations around the world that are going to be a threat to the United States. They're going to be a threat to parts of Europe, and they're going to be a threat to the Middle East, and they're going to be a threat to Israel.
Yeah. The Abrahamic covenant says, it has a telltale phrase in it, or a key phrase, I'll bless those who bless you and I'll curse those who curse you.
Yes.
And that's been called a covenant of curse for curse in kind. In other words, if you try to destroy Israel, you yourself will be destroyed in just about the same way you tried to destroy Israel.
It comes right back on you.
Comes right back on
and
you.
God intended in Genesis 12:3 to bless all those individuals and nations eventually that bless Israel. And those that have been there to support Israel have been greatly blessed. And those that have not have been under a curse and have experienced curses. And some of these terror events are curses. And you see, Gary, when the land that God gave to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when they attempt to force their people off that land, like the United States helped back the dislocation and disruption of 9,500 Jewish people's lives from their homes in Gush Katif, 24 settlements there, and 4 in northern Samaria in 2005. Within hours, Hurricane Katrina developed just out of the Bahamas and became the most significant catastrophe in history. The same parallel language was being used in both countries to explain what had happened. And Katrina started just within a few hours after President Bush acknowledged that this was critical to his two-state plan.
Now, I can't stress this enough. For those of you who are not familiar with Bill's work, and here's his book, Eye to Eye, also a DVD, and the thesis of the book is that God reacts. When somebody challenges his plan, his idea of those things which should be blessing planet Earth, if somebody comes up against God, he reacts. This is so alien, I think, to most people. I want you to talk about that a little bit, because I think most people who go to churches, and by the way, faithful Christians sing hymns, they enjoy fellowship, they study the Bible, they try to live moral lives, and yet they think of God as somewhere else, kind of removed, not really noticing, not really reacting. And what led you to the position that you now hold, that God really does react?
Well, Gary, when I watch these events over and over again, you see major U.S. meetings with Israeli and Palestinian leaders, and then these enormous events happening the same day or within 24 hours. And I noticed also the greater the pressure on Israel, the greater the corresponding catastrophe, such as 9/11 and Katrina, major events. But what was taking place at the time of 9/11? President Bush was going to call for a Palestinian state, 2 states living side by side in peace and security in the biblical heartland of Israel, Judea, Samaria, and East Jerusalem. Hurricane Katrina, 9,500 Jews had just been forced out of their home and out of their land. God of Israel put it on their heart for these people to occupy this land. So what I noticed, Gary, is this collective fury or fire. I mean, these events, it's sad to go see these events and these catastrophes, and it's hard for those people that have had to live through these experiences. But over 90 times this has happened. And it's a collective fury or fire, wrath to the nation, to land in the nation of the leader that puts the pressure on Israel. Whether it's the catastrophes, the hurricanes, the major earthquakes, the tornadoes, or the terror events. Here, same thing in Europe. Europe's experienced the same.
And isn't it curious that international conferences are held concerning the weather, climate change? Everybody says, the climate is becoming less stable and there's more to be afraid of. And they may actually be causing the thing they're most afraid of.
That's a very interesting point, because the irony is that I'd say 75 to 80% of the billion-dollar events in the last 20 years don't have a global warming connection, but they have a connection to U.S. pressure on Israel to divide their land.
That is really, really interesting. In the next couple of minutes, I want to ask you to sort of walk out on a limb, walk out on a ledge over a deep canyon, and try to predict. What do you think we're going to push Israel, or try to push Israel into doing here in the next year or 2 or 3?
Well,
what does it look like?
Well, it's interesting is the White House kind of threw in the towel a couple weeks ago, thinking that we're just not going to get anything worked out in Obama's final 14 months in office.
Yeah.
John Kerry's been determined since he became Secretary of State 3 years ago that he's going to be the guy. That the only reason there isn't peace in Israel is because he hasn't been working on it. Well, he left Israel on November 24th pretty unhappy and angry. He'd put a full court press on Netanyahu and Abbas to go back to the peace table to stop this terror that's taking place in Israel right now. And he left very annoyed. one of his senior advisors stated that we have pretty much given up hope. We tried everything. And then Kerry, as soon as he got back to the United States, says, well, it's just going to spin out of control. The sides aren't serious about making peace right now, and things are just going to spin out of control. Maybe after that, then they'll have interest in getting back to the peace table.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Eye to Eye is the book, and by the way, we have it in our online bookstore, prophecywatchers.com, and click the online bookstore, and you'll find Eye to Eye for $11.95. We also have a DVD for $24.95, the Eye to Eye DVD, which allows you to kind of experience the things that Bill has noticed and has written about. This is $24.95. You can get the package, both the book and the DVD, for $34.95, and we're going to throw in a freebie with that. We have here a Join Us in Jerusalem DVD. Our recent trip to Israel, which we recorded, and there's some of the sights, the sounds, the places, the wonderful things that we saw, the wonderful people we met. And you can get this absolutely free if you order the package for $34.95, and you get a free magazine too, The Prophecy Watcher. So right there on the online bookstore, check it out. The Eye to Eye DVD, $24.95. The book is $11.95. Both of them together, $34.95 with the other free items. And let me, in the next few seconds, let Bill talk about his website. People want to follow you on the web. What do they do?
Thank you, Gary. Our website is watch.org. It's WATCH.org. Mm-hmm. We're posting news 365 days out of the year. That's world news from a biblical perspective with a focus on Israel and the Middle East. And then I put out a weekly news report from Washington, the Koenig's Eye View from the White House. That is a weekly summary of key news that happened that week that was biblically relevant. And as you know, Gary, it's getting difficult to keep it at 15 pages. There's so much going on. But between the news report and the website, we're doing the best we can to keep on top of all these major events that are taking place.
Things are accelerating.
Accelerating at a rapid pace.
Which, makes me want to look up. I think my redemption may be drawing near.
Everything's aligning very, very quickly, Gary.
It is.
For sure.
I'm not a date setter, but there's just something inside of me that says, wow, we're getting really close.
Yes, absolutely.
Bill, it's such a pleasure to talk to you. May the Lord bless your work.
Thank you, Gary.
And we'll be talking to you again soon, I'm sure.
Look forward to it.
It's always great. And I hope you've enjoyed this conversation with Bill Koenig, White House correspondent. He is the director of Koenig World Watch Daily. And by the way, his website is?
Watch.org, WATCH.org.
And of course, we are the Prophecy Watchers. We're watching, so you be watching too. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.